The NATO air campaign continues against Libyan military targets and so far has prevented Mr. Gaddafi's forces from retaking rebel-held territory in the eastern part of the country. But rebel forces in the western city of Misrata are taking a heavy pounding from Gaddafi's loyalists in a standoff that highlights the limits of air power alone in helping the insurgency. Reports from inside the besieged city indicate the casualty toll is high and rising. Michael O'Hanlon is a military analyst at the Brookings Institution in Washington.
And the Gaddafi forces have rallied enough that it does not appear they will quickly be defeated. In fact, they may even be winning. But it's a fairly close call, and I think it's headed for a prolonged period of stalemate unless we can find some way to shift the balance.
A group of Libyan Americans met in Washington recently seeking ways to help the rebels. Among them was Ibrahim Jibril, chairman of the North American Libyan Conference.
So we don't really need American soldiers or Marines or French or British or whomever. What is needed is to equip those who are fighting so that they can do the fighting.
Michael O'Hanlon agrees. He says there is no justification for not providing Libya's rebels with the kinds of weapons they need to defeat Gaddafi.
Defensive weaponry like anti-tank weapons, I think, is crucial. And there's no particular reason that I can see not to do it. Also, the rebels will someday be the core of a new Libyan army. We've already declared we're not going to deal with Gaddafi. So why are we so reluctant to start working with them?
O'Hanlon says that while the rebel leadership, the Transitional National Council, was able to persuade France, Britain and Italy to send in military advisors, that by itself will not be enough.
I've seen so far about Western advisors is not sufficient to make me think that they'll make a big difference, because they're going in, in numbers of a few dozen, and they're not going to have any direct battlefield role. They're not going to be providing weaponry.
Assam Omesh is chairman of the Libyan American Task Force. He says Washington can justify increased involvement in Libya under the terms of the United Nations Security Council resolution, which calls for the protection of Libyan civilians.
We need to do everything we can, both in lethal and non-lethal assistance, both in logistics as well as the provision of training and equipping those who are fighting this war to end the regime the brutal regime of Gaddafi.
Secretary of State Hillary Clinton has ruled out deploying U.S. military advisors to help the rebels following President Obama's pledge not to send American ground troops to Libya. The allies will now be evaluating the effectiveness of using U.S. drones. Mohamed Elshinnawi, VOA News, Washington.